Hello, fellow Planeswalkers, it's Scott, and today we're back for day 3 of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoiler season. We got a lot of great cards to talk about today, but before we do that, please remember to like and subscribe to this content so you can get more of this, and special thanks to Caffeinated Gamers for sponsoring this preview series. So let's get started with our first Lost Caverns of Ixalan preview for the day. So we're going to start with Bloodletter of Axlazaz. For 1 and 3 black mana, you get a Vampire Demon with flying. That's a 2/4. And if an opponent would lose life during your turn, they lose twice that much life instead. So to me, this is one of the most interesting cards we've seen so far from the set, and clearly is going to, I think, wreak havoc all throughout Standard, because if your opponent loses life, they are going to double that life loss with this card. And black has a number of ways to incidentally cause damage or life loss to an opponent. And because of that, I think this is going to be an all-star in a variety of black decks throughout this next 3 years of Standard. Next, we've got Bedrock Tortoise. For 3 and a green mana, you get a creature that's a turtle. It's a 0/6, and as long as it's your turn, creatures you control have hexproof. Each creature you control with toughness greater than its power assigns combat damage equal to its toughness rather than its power. So we've got a lot of cards in Standard currently that see play that have more toughness than power, and when you compare them with Bedrock Tortoise, even cards like we just talked about with Bloodletter of Axlazaz, you're going to see even more damage come because of those cards. And to me, because of that, those two cards in particular are going to work really well together. And maybe this is when Golgari can really become a powerful deck in Standard. Next we've got Terror Tide. For 2 and 2 black mana, you get a sorcery with Fathomless Descent. All creatures get -X/-X until end of turn, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. In a mill deck, I think this is a fantastic removal spell, because you can basically kill everything that's on the board, and potentially not your stuff if the right combination of cards are in your graveyard. So I think what we're going to see is this played in potentially that kind of deck to help wipe out your opponent's creatures, so that way you can go ahead and attack through without any blockers. But also what I think this can do is, in a variety of decks in the mid to late game, you're going to have enough cards in your graveyard that are permanents that this does become a -3/-3, a -4/-4, or even a -5/-5, which is a pretty powerful ability. Next, we've got the Millennium Calendar. For 1 mana, you get a legendary artifact, and whenever 1 or more permanents become untapped during your untap step, put that many time counters on the Millennium Calendar. So this is a really interesting card where you're going to be putting time counters on it, and the goal is to accumulate as many as possible. And for 2 mana, you can double the number of time counters on the Millennium Calendar. And your ultimate goal is, when there are 1,000 or more time counters on the Millennium Calendar, you get to sacrifice it, and your opponent basically loses the game, because you're going to do 1,000 damage to them and win the game. Now, is this practical in Standard? Maybe not, but certainly I think this is definitely a card that some Commander players will roll out as a pretty interesting option, because throughout the course of a game, you're going to be attacking with stuff, you're going to be tapping things that you're going to use throughout the game, and that includes your lands, because it's 1 or more permanents become untapped, so all your lands are going to count towards this. So I could see this even sneaking into the right kind of control build, and you use that doubling ability to maybe get yourself to 1,000. And right now we don't have a lot of artifact removal that's seen play in Standard, so this could be the card that pushes some of the decks that are struggling on just a little bit over the top. Next, we've got Palante's Hatcher for 3 and a red and a green mana. You get a creature that's a dinosaur. That's a 5/3, and other dinosaurs you control have haste. And when Palante's Hatcher enters the battle, create 2/0/1 green dinosaur egg creature tokens. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you control 1 or more eggs, sacrifice an egg and then create a 3/3 green dinosaur creature token. So we know we're going to get a bunch of dinosaurs in this set. So I think this card may be the key card in that deck, because when you play it, after that, every creature you have that's a dinosaur is going to have haste. And hasty dinosaurs that are big make opponents have a very difficult time to stay in the game, particularly if any of those creatures have trample. So I'm excited to play with this. I think there's going to be a good dinosaur deck out there, and the ability to just kind of create 3/3s with it as well when you begin combat. And I'm imagining we're going to have other ways to create 0/1 green dinosaur egg tokens. So I think this could be an all-star in Standard in the right build. But it is 5 mana, which is a drawback of the card. Next, we've got Stalactite Stalker. For a black mana, you get a Golem Rogue. That's a 1/1 with Menace. And at the beginning of your end step, if you descend at this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on Stalactite Stalker. So I think that's the key. If we do have a deck that's built around the descend ability, then I think this is going to be a very good card in Standard. And it also has the ability to, for 2 and a black mana, you can sacrifice Stalactite Stalker, and target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn, where X is Stalactite Stalker's power. So as long as you've got the ability to descend regularly throughout the course of a game, you can make this a 4/4, 5/5 throughout the course of the game. And then if you need to, because your opponent, say, has a Sheoldred you want to take out, you can sacrifice it to do that. So if Descend is a real deck in Standard, I think this is an all-star in that deck. Next, we've got Raging Hammerskull. For 2 and a green mana, you get a 6/6 dinosaur. And whenever Raging Hammerskull attacks, if you don't control another dinosaur, put a stun counter on it. If a permanent with a stun counter would become untapped, remove 1 from it instead. So this is, I think, potentially one of the most broken, powerful cards in the set, because we know we're going to get more dinosaurs, so there's probably going to be a dinosaur deck in Standard. And if you can just, play this on turn 3 and on turn 4 play another dinosaur, then you're going to be able to attack with a 6/6 that is going to untap when your untap step comes. And a 6/6 on turn 3 puts your opponent on the back foot, because they're going to have direct removal that can kill this. Otherwise, they're going to lose the game pretty quickly, because this is a 2 or 3 turn clock in the right setup. So I'm excited to play with this, and I'm excited to see, because of what we've already seen from dinosaurs from the set, this in Standard. Next, we've got a couple of caves from the day's previews that I think are going to help push us towards having a deck built around them in Standard. So the first one is going to be Well of Offering. When Well of Offering enters the battlefield tap, and when Well of Offering enters the battlefield, you get to exile up to 3 target cards from graveyard. So that can be your graveyard or an opponent's, and you can add colorless mana with it, or you can add 1 mana of any color among the exiled cards. So this could be a pretty powerful ability. The ability to exile something from your opponent's graveyard. Maybe there's a creature that they might want to reanimate that you can go grab with this. And it also then gives you the ability to potentially generate any mana color that you need for your deck to operate well. Next, we've got Sunken Citadel. And Sunken Citadel enters the battlefield tapped. As it enters the battlefield, you get to choose a color. And you can add 1 mana of the chosen color by tapping it, and you can tap it to add 2 mana of the chosen color, but you can spend this mana only to activate abilities of land sources. So in the Caves deck, I think this is going to be a very important card, and it also helps us with our creature lands, because it's now 2 mana towards one of the creature lands being activated. So I think we're going to see this as a card that finds its way into a variety of decks in Standard, but certainly will be a big help for the Cave deck. Next, we've got Unstable Glyph Bridge for 3 and 2 white mana. You get an artifact, and when Unstable Glyph Bridge enters the battlefield, if you cast it, for each player, choose a creature with power 2 or less that player controls. Then destroy all creatures except creatures chosen this way. So this is a board wipe where you can wipe out your opponent's side, but unfortunately it also wipes out yours, but you get to choose your best creature with 2 power or less, and you can leave your opponent with their worst creature that's 2 power or less. So that isn't really a great ability in terms of board wipes in Standard. Right now we've got a lot of better ones than that, but because of its craft ability, it might be something that some decks may want to use, because you can craft with an artifact for 5 mana, and when you do, you get Sandswirl Wanderglyph. It's a artifact creature that's a golem and is a 5/3, and it has flying. And whenever an opponent casts a spell during their turn, they can attack you or planeswalkers you control this turn. And each opponent who attacks you or a planeswalker you control this turn can't cast spells either. So it's a very interesting, and this is why I think this might have some Standard playability, because the backside is very good. Telling your opponent you get a choice to either cast spells or attack me is a very powerful ability. And as long as you can protect Sandswirl Wanderglyph, then you're going to be in a really good situation, because it's going to be a tough choice for some of your opponents whether they want to cast some spells, which means they take a turn off from attacking, which could, keep you alive in the late game when otherwise they might be able to kill you, or get you close enough to death where on the next turn they would potentially kill you. So I think this is a card that is at least playable in Standard, and we'll have to see if there's a deck that really would like to use this in its core 60. Next, we've got Mobile Throne for 4 mana. You get a 4/4 artifact creature that's a golem, and it has Ward 2, so it can protect itself. And as Mobile Throne enters the battlefield, choose a creature type. Mobile Throne is a chosen creature type in addition to its other types. If a triggered ability of another creature you control of the chosen type triggers, then that triggered ability triggers an additional time. So I think this is a very good card. 4 mana for a 4/4 with Ward 2's a good rate on its own. But that ability to use this as a build around card in any variety of, say, Merfolk or Pirate, Goblin, whatever deck we want to build, I think is a nice place to be in Standard, because that ability to get those enter the battlefield abilities triggering a second time would be very, very powerful. We already have a humans deck, so you could name humans, and then all the enter the battlefield abilities that trigger with that deck would trigger an additional time, and that could be game changing over the course of a match. So let's take a look at our next card in Amelia Benavides Aguilar. For 1 white and 1 black mana, you get a legendary creature that's a vampire scout. That's a 2/2. She has Ward, which is pay 3 life, so she can protect herself. So for your opponent to use a cut down to kill her, or a go for the throat to kill her, or a play with fire, whatever it would be, that costs them 3 life, which I think is important in a game of Magic right now. So pretty much any creature that we see with this kind of ability is harder to remove, because we really don't necessarily want to take that pain of paying the word cost in life. And whenever you gain life, Amelia Benavides Aguilar explores. Then if Amelia's power is exactly 20, destroy all other creatures. Which I think is an ability that we look at as a great ability on the card, but I think that's not the ability that we're worried about here. It's that when you gain life, you get to explore. You're probably not going to get to 20, but what you will do over the course of a game is gain enough life that instead of being a 2/2, she's a 6/6 or a 7/7. And if you can use her effectively during the course of the game, she can become your win condition pretty easily if you're having consistent manners of gaining life. And we've got a variety of decks where I think this will fit into, so I think she'll be kind of a toolbox kit in any deck that's got a decent amount of life gain. Next, we've got Get Lost. For 1 and a white mana, you get an instant, and you get to destroy target creature, enchantment, or planeswalker. Its controller creates 2 map tokens. So I like the flexibility of this. The downside is your opponent does get to explore twice, but the ability to kill their best planeswalker, their best creature, or their important enchantment, I think makes that cost worth paying in Standard. So I think this is at least a sideboard card in decks that want to be able to have that flexibility of killing a creature, an enchantment, or a planeswalker. And that, I think, makes it at least playable as a sideboard card in Standard. And probably, I think it'll see some main deck action when we get into the Lost Caverns of Ixalan Standard season. Next, we've got Poetic Ingenuity. For 2 and a red mana, you get an enchantment, and whenever 1 or more dinosaurs you control attack, create that many treasure tokens. So on the one hand, the first ability here allows you to create treasure tokens, and whenever you cast an artifact spell, you get to create a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token. This ability triggers only once per turn. So when you cast an artifact spell, you get that added bonus of creating a 3/1 red dinosaur creature token. And we've got spells like Treasure Map already in Standard from this set that are going to be played. So I think this is an interesting card, and depending on where builds go with red decks, I think this is a card that could be included if you're doing something that you're going to be casting artifacts regularly, or you've got a decent number of dinosaurs in your deck. So you're at least going to be getting the advantage of all those extra treasures, which will allow you to cast larger and larger dinosaurs, which will hopefully help you then win the game. Next, we've got Captain Storm, Cosmium Raider. For a blue and a red mana, you get a legendary creature that's a human pirate and is a 2/2. And whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, put a +1/+1 counter on target pirate you control. So again, another card that works with artifact synergy. So if you're casting artifacts, what you'll get every time you do that is that +1/+1 counter that you can put on Captain Storm or another pirate that you control. So we know we've already got a number of decent artifact creatures and or artifacts in Standard. So again, I think this is going to be a ability that's pretty easy to activate. It's just finding the right deck for it. Next, we've got Master's Mural. For 3, a white and a blue mana, you get an artifact, and when Master's Mural enters the battlefield, create a 4/4 white and blue golem artifact creature token. So 4/4 for 5 mana, not a great rate, but it also has craft, and you can craft with an artifact for 4, 2 white and a blue, and you get to exile this artifact, exile another artifact you control or an artifact card from your graveyard, and return this card transformed under its owner's control, craft only as a sorcery. So when you craft Master's Mural, you get Master's Manufactory. And what this allows you to do is to create a 4/4 blue and white golem artifact creature token each turn, and you get to activate it only if Master's Manufactory or another artifact enter the battlefield under your control this turn. And we also have some things that will untap artifacts, like the Teferi from, I know this is a long time ago, but the Teferi from the Ixalan block that does untap a artifact. So you could use these two in combination and get 2 4/4s a turn, and that would be just a bonkers ability to basically guarantee yourself a 4/4 every turn, as long as you are putting an artifact into play on that given turn. And we've got a lot of ways to do that in Standard, whether it's blood tokens or power stones or any variety of other things. So I think activating this will be pretty easy. So I'm interested to see if we get a artifact based deck around this kind of ability in Standard. Next, we've got Sunbird Standard. For 3 mana, you get an artifact that if you tap it, you get 1 mana of any color. So typical mana rock that you would see in Standard. Now this one has craft as well, and you can craft from with 1 or more up to 5 items. So exile this artifact, exile 1 or more other permanents you control and or cards from your graveyard. Return this card transformed under its owner's control, craft only as a sorcery. So when you do that, you get Sunbird Effigy. It's an artifact creature that's a bird construct. It has flying, it has vigilance and haste, and its power and toughness are each equal to the number of colors among the exile cards used to craft it. So whatever cards you basically have in your graveyard or you're going to be using to craft this, then you're going to get that number of power and toughness on your creature. So I can see this as, you know, something you use in a 3 or 4 color deck, and then in the mid to late game you go ahead and take out of your graveyard the multiple colors of mana that you need and get this to be a 4/4 or 5/5, and then it also is a mana rock on the back for each color among the exile cards used to craft Sunbird Effigy. Add 1 mana of that color. So you could potentially, if you've got the right build, you could have this produce 5 mana on a turn, which I think is a pretty powerful ability. And the fact that it has vigilance allows you to attack with it and then later use the mana. So I think that is a very, very powerful card in the right build in Standard. And again, just like what we talked about with Masters Muriel, we got to build the right deck around these cards. But they're powerful enough that they could see Standard play. Next, we have Spelunking. For 2 and a green mana, you get an enchantment, and when Spelunking enters the battlefield, you get to draw a card. Then you may put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put a cave onto the battlefield this way, you gain 4 life, and lands you control enter the battlefield untapped. Now, for 3 mana, you get a card, and you get to put an extra land on the field. But more importantly, for that 3 mana, all of your caves are going to come in untapped after you cast this. I think that's a very valuable ability, which will make it a part of any cave deck, and maybe some other decks in Standard as well. Next, we've got Explorer's Cache. For 1 and a green mana, we got an artifact, and Explorer's Cache enters the battlefield with 2 +1/+1 counters on it, and when a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Explorer's Cache. And you can tap it to move a +1/+1 counter from Explorer's Cache on a target creature, activate only as a sorcery. So for 2 mana, you're getting basically 2 +1/+1 counters that you can move onto creatures, and when those creatures die, then they return their +1/+1 counter to Explorer's Cache, and then you get to put it on a different creature. So I think that recursiveness of these +1/+1 counters makes this a very interesting card in Standard, and we already have a lot of other cards that put +1/+1 counters on things. So I think this could potentially be abusable in the right build in Standard. Next, we've got our last cards of the day. And first, we'll start with Kinjali's Dawnrunner. For 2 and a white mana, you get a Human Scout. It's a 1/1 and has double strike. And when Kinjali's Dawnrunner enters the battlefield, you get to explore. So you're either going to get an extra land out of that, or you're going to get a +1/+1 counter. Ideally, the +1/+1 counter to make Kinjali's Dawnrunner a 2/2. And then that double strike ability is going to be very, very powerful, as it will kill small creatures in combat and help protect you against bigger creatures as well. And we've had a number of creatures similar to this for 2 mana that were 1/1s with double strike. So I think the advantage of getting this card potentially to 2/2 is really nice, and in any of those builds that are looking to add another creature around that ability, this might be a good fit for those. Next, we've got Staunch Crewmate. For 1 and a blue mana, you get a Human Pirate. That's a 2/1. And when Staunch Crewmate enters the battlefield, look at the top 4 cards of your library. You may reveal an artifact or a pirate card from among them and put it into your hand. So for 2 mana, you're basically getting a 2/1 pirate, and you get to draw a card. So I think on its own, that's a pretty good card, and I think we'll see Standard play because of that. And then its stats are gravy at that point because you've gotten that advantage of a card. and you put another pirate in play. So this is probably going to go in the pirate deck, but it might go in other decks as well. Maybe an artifact deck, but certainly any deck that's going to play a lot of pirates, this is a good card for that deck. Finally, we've got Confounding Riddle for 2 and a blue mana. You get an instant where you get to choose one. You'd look at the top 4 cards of your library. You can put one of them into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. Or you can counter target spell unless the controller pays 4. So the flexibility of this card I like. I mean, it is overcosted at 3 mana because, you know, we've got Impulse that does, you know, the same thing where we look at 4 cards and choose one of them, put them in your hand. So we can do this for 2 mana, but the flexibility of it, I think, gives it some potential for standard playability. All right, that's day 3 of the Lost Caverns of Ixalan preview season. Hope you enjoyed the spoilers from today. And I will be back tomorrow with another installment of spoilers from the Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And thanks for staying to the end of the video. Again, remember to like and subscribe to get further content like this. And I will see you next time with our next Lost Caverns of Ixalan spoiler video. Thanks. I'll see you then.